I've heard a lot of calls last week where people were saying, I want 50,000, I want 100,000, I want to leave behind, more than what we can provide. And a lot of you are making a really, really big mistake out of the gates. And so wanted to take this time and talk about this. But before I tell you what the mistake is, does anyone have a guess?
Divulging.
Trying to address it right away.
In what way?
Trying to overcome the objection before you do your discovery or get into the call farther.
And how do you think people are trying to overcome the objection?
By immediately telling them we only offer 35,000 or something like that, possibly.
Yes, exactly. So probably at least heard 3 calls. If I heard 3, then I'm sure it happened more than 3 times, because I'm only one person and I bounce around from calls all day long. So I'm not going to call anybody out, but this is a really good learning moment. Who has gotten a call that said, I'm looking for 100,000 or 50,000 or 75,000. And you immediately said, well, we need to stop right there because we only offer 35,000. We're a final expense company. Who's done that?
I do that.
I've done it for sure.
Oh, pointing. We have Kevin. We'll embarrass him later. Okay. So before I tell you, why it's a mistake and how to correct it, let's use this as an opportunity for everybody to contribute to the training. So why would it be a mistake to say, oh, before we go any further, you should know we're a final expense company. We only offer 35,000.
Because they don't get to hear the value of what we do offer.
Why else? That's a good one, but there's multiple reasons.
Because you don't even know what they want the policy for yet. You don't know what portion is for their funeral, and you don't know you don't even know why they're even inquiring.
I love that. Charisma's been to a lot of training. You just sounded just like me. Who else? What else?
And they don't know it.
They don't know it. Yeah. So
I would say that they also, we're letting them know there's a limit already without hearing anything.
And is that a positive thing to say to start the tone of the conversation, or would that be a negative thing to say in starting the conversation?
Negative.
Negative, yeah.
Yeah. Why would it be negative?
Put a lid on the conversation. You can't move forward. It's a turn off right away.
Totally. I mean, if you're going to tell me when I walk into the store that I'm looking for a blue shirt and you say, oh, we don't have the color blue here, but they might have 50 other shades, and I just walk out, right? They just lost my business. So the first thing that everybody needs to understand is that our customers have literally no idea what they need. They have no idea what they need because they don't understand life insurance. They don't understand it. All they see, you have to understand what is going on with the buyer, what they're being inundated with all day, the advertisements that they're seeing online and in the mail and on TV. And you think that the advertisements are going to show, get 35,000 of coverage for $200 a month.
Never.
I mean, do you ever see stuff like that?
I once.
No. The advertisement is specific to get people to call, to get the phone to ring, where, you're 20,000 for $9.95, the Colonial Penn ad, you can get up to 20,000, but each unit is $9.95, right? And so you can get 20 units times $9.95 to get 20,000, but they're in 2 separate sentences, but it gets them to think that they can get 20,000 for $9.95. Or all the other advertisements are going to be advertising term insurance, right? Or they're not going to advertise whole life because whole life isn't cheap. That's what gets the phone to ring. So when people are calling, sometimes I feel like you guys think that they have made a business plan and they've thought about this for months on end. And they're like, okay, I want to leave this much money for this purpose, for this purpose, for this purpose. and I want this portion to be term, and I want this portion to be whole life, and I want this portion to be like, they know nothing, right? They know nothing. So when someone calls in and says, I want $100,000, okay, let's figure out what it is you want it for, right? I'm not sure if what we do can even help you get. Would it be okay if I asked you a few questions so I can get a better understanding of what you need the 100,000 for, and make sure I can even help you in the first place? Would that be okay? That's it. That is literally all you have to say. If you start your conversation with, oh, well, we only offer 35,000. Click. That lead is gone. Are we all on the same page that we're no longer going to spill the beans on what type of coverage we have, how much coverage we offer, that it doesn't matter what the customer says, it makes absolutely no difference?
Yes.
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 Right? That is the point of discovery, because we're trying to figure out what they want. And so how many times, for people that are doing discovery correctly, how many times when we ask, what expenses are you mostly concerned about taking care of with this policy when you pass, what do they typically say?
Their funeral,
Cremation.
Yeah.
medical debt.
And if there are other things that they want to cover, that is our opportunity to dissect that for them and make really good recommendations for what they should be looking for to take care of those moving forward. So this is what I wanted to talk about today, because I think that it's confusing. Some of the way that we explain term and whole life is confusing. And I want everyone to know who hasn't scheduled coaching calls with me, that when I get on the phone with someone, I spend the majority of my time in education. So I get to know them. I get to figure out what it is they're wanting, why they're on the phone, why they haven't purchased something, who they're trying to protect, what they need the insurance to cover for. Have they ever had it before? If so, how much? What are they looking for? Why is it important for them to get it? Have they thought about what would happen if they didn't do anything at all? I'm trying to identify a plan B, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to sell them. Right? That's the point of my discovery. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to sell them. For those of you who have been on discovery with me, after 4 or 5 minutes of a call, I already know how that conversation is going to go and how it's going to end 100% of the time. Or I'll say, I don't know if we can help this person, and I'm probably going to end that call before I go too far and waste 45 minutes of my time. Right? One of the things that it happens sometimes is you get a lead and they only want it for mortgage, or they only want it for a legacy. And you're trying to talk them in to wanting it for funeral expenses. Not everybody wants it for funeral expenses, right? Our job is not to talk somebody into something that they don't want. Our job is to make sure they want some of it for funeral expenses, and then to educate them later on how to separate the wants from the needs. And that's what we're going to really dive into today, so that you can have better quality conversations, because you cannot move on from the education portion of your script until the customer has told you, I am on the same page with you. I am here to only now moving forward talk to you about a small burial policy, and this other large money that I possibly want and look for. I understand that the only affordable policy that I can get for that much coverage is term, and that if they still want term, that Adam and I will put them in contact with someone that can help them with that. So I want everyone to know, once we go through the steps here, if you sell someone a final expense policy and they still want 50, 100, 200,000 of term insurance, in addition to that, send it to me and we'll get it out to one of our referral partners. Transparent, I have a term policy.
Yeah.
Right? If something were to happen to me or my husband and we lost one of our incomes, income replacement for mortgage protection and other expenses is really important. It's
I
kind of
think that
like car
not,
insurance, right? Except you don't get fined if you don't have life insurance. You get fined if you don't have car insurance. But for people that are young enough to have a lot of expenses that need to be covered, should God forbid something happen to them, I think that it's very close-minded of us to tell them that they don't need it or they shouldn't even consider it and that they should only get our small final expense policy, right? I think that it elevates us as the authority in their mind when we can agree with them that what they're looking for is valid, but that they should probably understand and have them start questioning themselves, right? Well, what happens then when you outlive that policy? And now you're 75 or 80, and now you're still living and your family has nothing. What happens then?
I try to not talk negative about any company or any product, and sometimes I'll get off script and, for instance, when I'm talking about term, I just let them know that, hey, there's a place and a time for term. And my favorite example is, hey, let's say that you're younger, you purchased a home, you're on the hook for 30 years for a mortgage. Obviously, a 30-year term would be a good idea. So in case you passed away, your husband or your wife can remain in the home. So there's a time and a place for that. But I've already established that we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about final expense. And obviously, you want a policy that's going to be there when you pass. And obviously, that's when you go when that type of policy is not going to be there when you die. It's not designed for that. So I don't like to say terrible term or I mean, it's not that it's a bad thing, but.
Well, for people that are older, right? For people that I would say are 60 and older, I think at that point, people aren't really calling for mortgage protection. They're not really calling for larger policies. They're just calling because they've seen advertisements and they think they can get a large amount of coverage for a small monthly payment. And so in that case, what Melissa loves to say, terrible term, I think that's a great thing to say to help give people the understanding about, okay, I need to bring myself back to reality. But this is when we're learning in discovery that they want it for all these larger expenses, but they also have said, I want it for funeral costs. Or you've asked them, okay, so I've heard you want it for this, this, and this. What about for your funeral expenses? If you were to pass away, would you want part of the money to go towards that too? So either they say yes to that or they volunteer that information. Then once we go into term versus whole life, we can then start separating the two. And the biggest mistake people are making here is they're just sticking to the generic explanation of term every time and not making it relevant to the customer. So for those of you who have been in coaching with me recently, how do you make it relevant to the customer if someone says, I want 100,000 and I just want to leave money to my kids, but yes, I absolutely want to pay for my funeral costs. How do you make it relevant to them? Explaining term insurance. How do you do that?
I just kind of go into explaining how the term is not designed to last for a long period of time and how, 9 times out of 10, most people end up outliving that policy. And then their family's in the same position that they're in right now where they have zero coverage. And so then I kind of try and get their agreeance on, now having a term policy there or just in case policy, like that's not bad. It's great because if something were to happen to you right now, your family would be well protected. But because, people end up outliving those policies, then they become uninsurable. They don't really have anything at all. So I just kind of explain to them how term works, how the price goes up, and just really honestly just kind of stick to that script, but make it more relevant to the client situation. So now, I understood correctly. You are wanting to make sure that you have something for your children when you pass away. Was that correct, Mary? Oh, yeah. Okay, so would you agree that maybe having a term policy might not be the best solution just for you long term? Oh my goodness, yes, I didn't even know that about term. I had no idea. I just thought it was a lot of money for cheap. And then all of a sudden they're agreeing with me. And then they're like, I want the whole life. Tell me more about the whole life. What do you do? And then we proceed.
That was perfect. You missed one small detail though, that I'm looking for to make it relevant to the customer and their inquiry. Does that know what I'm referring to?
you have some, like assuming if they have like, usually they might tell you if they have some type of health condition, and then you would tell them, you would use the script accordingly. So if they don't have any health conditions, or if they do, then they would need to know, if you know that they have health conditions, then that they might not even qualify for.
That's correct. That's correct. Although I'm not talking about that yet. What Bianca is referring to is the fact that when someone calls in for a large amount of coverage and they say right out of the gate, I have diabetes, or I have, I had a heart attack last year. Well, they're not going to qualify for term insurance. So when you explain term insurance, you actually have to explain it in a way where you have to let them know it's something they probably wouldn't be able to qualify for, because they're going to love the fact that it's a large amount of coverage for a small monthly payment that only lasts 10 years. Because in their mind, they might not even live another 10 years. So they're like, oh, I'm going to go get that term. So then one of the paragraphs in the script, talks about the fact that we reverse engineer how we explain term, that if you have any health conditions at all, then you probably won't get approved for that. But what I'm referring to is, depending on how much coverage the customer comes in and says they want, that's what you have to start with in your beginning of your explanation. So your first sentence is always, term insurance is temporary coverage that it provides a large amount for a small monthly payment. Now, you had shared with me earlier that you were hoping to get 50,000 or 75,000 or 100,000, whatever that number is for them. Okay, you have to draw that back in and insert it into your story, because that was what they wanted. If you fail to say the amount of coverage they were looking for and you just go generic on them, they're not going to connect the dots. Okay. You had shared with me earlier that you were hoping to get $100,000, not just to cover your funeral expenses, but to leave money behind for your family. Right? Now, it's really important that you understand that the only affordable type of life insurance that you can get for $100,000 is going to be this term insurance. And what that means is it's only going to last maybe about 10 years or so, and then it's just going to cancel. And you have to pause. You don't have to ask questions necessarily to get a response. Pausing sometimes just allows the other person to fill the dead air with their thoughts, or any sort of, oh, something like that. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with you wanting to get a large policy to leave behind for your family, as long as you have the right expectations, because these temporary policies, they are really inexpensive, because if you're healthy, there's a 97% chance you're going to outlive it. And what happens then? Right? Because you also told me, in addition to wanting to leave money for your family, that you also want to make sure that the funeral expenses and the final expenses are taken care of, and that never cancels. So what happens if you get this large policy and you outlive it, and then it just cancels? Right? This is just like getting them to think about what would happen, get the wheels spinning. Then you can continue and say, so now you're 10 years older, right? You have to reapply. And God forbid your health were to change. It might even just be unaffordable, or you could even get declined. But the worst part, Sally, is that once you turn 80, it's going to cancel forever. And the majority of life insurance companies now won't even give you insurance, even if you wanted more. So do you see how, getting this large policy for everything, including the funeral costs, because it might not be the best option for you because it could cancel? Yeah, I do see that. Okay. And why do you feel that way though? Right? Because if you're talking, and you're not pausing, and you're not checking in, and you're not asking questions like, does this make sense? They're going to tune you out. And when you do ask the question, why do you feel that way? And they're just like, huh? What did you say? That means they weren't listening to you because you were talking too fast. Okay. So part of explaining term versus whole life and helping people go from here down to here is not just in making it relevant to them by saying, I know you said you wanted this much, but the only affordable amount of coverage for that much is going to be temporary, and kind of hold their hand and walk them through it slowly so they understand. If you just like rattle off with no pausing, no stopping, go fast, and then you just go right on to whole life, there's no room for them to even take anything in of what you just said, right? They're hearing all this information for the very first time. So think about what it was like when you got your life insurance license for the first time, or you were learning the script for the first time, or you were learning, you know, all the different underwriting criteria for all these different carriers for the first time. And someone just said, without pausing or breathing, well, here's all the options you have. Here's what it does. Here's what it qualifies for. Here's the health conditions. Here's all that. Got it? Okay, now we're going to move on to this. Okay, so this is what's happening in a lot of your conversations is you're going so fast, they don't even have time to process it, right? So we have to slow down, right? We have to slow down. We have to check in. We have to have strategic pausing, and we have to ask them, hey, does that make sense? Before you move on to something else. It's really, really important. I was hearing a few conversations last week where I had to text you, you got to slow down. Don't call yourself out.
Guilty.
Yeah.
Hope there.
So Dana, are you saying, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but if you don't get that buy-in to, you know, okay, this isn't really a best fit for you, and they're still saying, well, I'm going to just get it, you know, I want 100,000 and you can't convince me otherwise, and just end the conversation, not waste time.
You're missing the point, Carlos. I'm not trying to convince them out of getting what they want. I'm trying to encourage them to get what they want, but I'm educating them on how to get what they want. Right. So I'll say something like, so after I've explained the difference between term versus whole life, right? I'm separating the two. I'm saying, so can I make a recommendation? Right. So I know you're on a fixed income, because I also found that out earlier, and I know what they want the insurance for. Mm-hmm. Seems to me that no matter what happens, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know when we're going to pass. So what I'm hearing is it is important to you that if you were to outlive the next 10 years, that no matter what, you would want to have at least a small final expense plan for your family to take care of your funeral costs. Is that right? Yes, that is right. Okay. So before we move on, the only thing I can help you with today is a small permanent plan to take care of your funeral costs and final expenses. But I can make a recommendation later to possibly put you in contact with someone that can help you with a large temporary policy so that you could potentially leave extra money behind if something were to happen to you. But here's where I'm going with this too. This is still a game of chess, right? Because if someone is healthy enough to qualify for term insurance in their 50s and 60s, then they're probably going to outlive it because of their health. Do we all agree on that? Mm-hmm. We all agree they're probably going to outlive it due to their health, correct? So
I agree.
Before I move on from education, they have 1,000,000% told me, yes, I am only going to look at a small policy with you for burial. And you're going to put me in contact with someone else who could take care of the larger amount that I'm looking for a just in case policy, right? If you don't make that distinction and you don't get that buy-in that they're only going to be looking at a small policy with you, you're going to get an objection at the end, which is that's not enough coverage. That's how you avoid it. There's no way in hell anybody should get a that's not enough coverage objection at the end if they have told you and you have the right expectations that you're only going to be looking at a policy for burial. In education, you don't move on to FCGS. You don't move on to the Guardian Society, immediate payout. Anything we do, that's the cherry and icing on top of the cake, right? Because after they've got your buy-in, perfect. Now that we know the difference, you know, honestly, you can get a whole life policy anywhere, right? You really could. But now I'm going to talk to you about why people get it with us. Okay. So if you take the time to really educate your customer so they feel empowered to make good decisions for their family, and then you just kind of take it away, you could get it anywhere. Right. But now I'm going to tell you about why people get it with us. The status that you have now been placed in their mind is so high, nobody else will take the time to help them understand what they want so you can figure out what they need. Right? The 3 people before you heard, I want to quote for 100,000. Oh, here's a quote for 35,000. It's $250 a month. That's all I can give you. Click. I can't afford life insurance because I want this much. They're only quoting me this much and it's $200 a month. Well, of course, because nobody's taking the time to explain to you how it works and what you need. This is where the confusion comes in. So when you get to the end, that's the only thing you're talking about. You're only talking about a small final expense policy. So here's where we come back around with the chess game. Once we figure out what they qualify for, because if you're going to be recommending possibly term, you find out their final expense. Now you have up to 8 units of accidental death that you're going to be offering, right? The script calls for 5 units. So you're going to act as if you just thought about this idea, even though you knew the whole time you were going to circle back around. You know, if you pass away in the next 10 years, it's probably going to be due to an accident, don't you think? Because you're really healthy. So instead of wasting your money on this temporary policy that's just going to cancel, why don't we just make your just in case policy permanent with accidental, right? Because now if you pass away, your family's going to get the burial policy, plus they're going to get 50,000 if you pass away from a car accident, right? Or 80,000 if you do 8 units. Now the gap for what they wanted and what we're giving them is like here now. Now we have everything covered because we did it in a very strategic way. We didn't just have diarrhea of the mouth and just spew it all out in the first 5 minutes, right? We had a crescendo, a sequence of events that allowed us to build trust and build this problem awareness so that in the end, we're now, this is a lot of accidental death coverage. And I know you wanted this much and you're really, really healthy. I mean, wouldn't it make sense if you passed away in the next 10 years, it would probably be from an accident? I don't even know if you need to get this term policy anymore. I knew I was going to say this the whole time. Right? And if we find out they're modified, they can't get term anyway. Now you're going to come back and say, have, some news I want to share with you. If this is the case, if you really do have this condition, you're not going to be able to get approved for term, right? I know what we had said earlier that I was going to help you get that amount of coverage, but it's not all for naught because look at this. Now we introduce our accidental coverage and they have a lot more coverage now too. So no matter what happens, no matter what way you go, if you do it in the right way, you're going to make a complete circle and they're going to get everything with you anyways, right? Unless someone is in their 50s or 40s and they want mortgage protection, they're probably going to want a lot more anyways. So does all that make sense, you guys?
It makes more sense every time we
Yes.
go.
Yes.
Yes, it does.
That is how we need to be entering our conversations. This is a strategic sales process. It is by design. Every step has a reason. We're not haphazardly going into sales calls, letting the customer dictate and control the flow of the conversation. I know exactly where I'm taking my customer after the first 3-4 minutes of the call. I know exactly where we're going and I know how I'm going to take them there. And your conversations have to be that way every single time to have a 50, 60, 70% conversion rate. If you're stuck at the 10, 15, maybe even 20% conversion rate, you're just closing the people that fit our mold and that we're ready to buy anyways, and they happen to like you. We need to get away from that and we have to elevate ourselves as better, stronger, more sophisticated sales agents. Just because we sell final expense policies only doesn't mean we can't sell everyone. It's how we do it that's going to separate you from everyone else. And that's all I have to say about
Dana, you're so good.